Yo, what's going on, Dragon Ballers? Welcome back to another deck profile video. Our first deck profile for set 16 Realm of the Gods is going to be Green Champa. This is a deck that I'm just generally interested in, more for like a rogue fun level. I do think out of the two, Champa is much better than Beerus, even though if you guys read through the cards or saw my videos covering them, they are very similar archetypes, but I think Champa has a better card quality overall that it can play. So I decided to build Champa. I'm going to show you guys my build in today's video. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe, hit that bell so you never miss a video. And if you guys want to help support the channel, many ways to do so down in the description, particularly if you want to buy any of the cards to talk about in today's video, or any trading cards for that matter, use my link in the description to TCG Player. Also, shout out to Mystic TCG, our team's sponsor. You can hit them up for buying sealed product or for selling your collections as well. Anyways, we are going to get into this video. We have the Champa leader, again, very similar to Beerus, but the really cool thing about this leader is that it's a 15k unawakened and a 20k awakened. That is really interesting in a lot of matchups. Don't get me wrong, in a lot of matchups it's actually really bad. It's really good against decks that are low to the ground and spam battle cards that are, you know, 15, maybe even 20k battle cards, because you have that much of an easier time defending them. Like, imagine like an old school Storm style of deck. There are some decks nowadays that sort of resemble that, where they just literally spam 15ks. On your awakened side, none of those are doing damage unless your opponent combos, which is kind of crazy. Likewise too, your opponent's awakened leader, if they're attacking your leader, it's just never going to do damage, which is pretty sick. So I like Champa again for that reason. He has one more life than Beerus, and his awakened is a little bit more souped up, even though it is a 2-life awakened, so it's a little bit more risky, but we have some cards in the deck to kind of help monitor that. But anyways, starting in the main board, we'll go over the first 3 cards here. We have 4 Nameless Planet, 4 Whis pre-fight preparations, and 4 Batamo to battle U7. Okay, so firstly I want to mention that I have been thinking about trying a build that relies less on the field card, because honestly it's really frustrating when you don't hit the field card on turn 1, and even when you do hit it on turn 1, you kind of feel like you could have used your energy in a better way for some other things. But this build does lean into the field card, and I'll explain why I go with this ratio here. So we are playing 4 Nameless Planet because it sets you up for some defense, turn some of your battle cards into deadly defenders, which is very nice. Also gives you that awaken alternate win condition, which is also kind of cool. And then we have 4 Whis. So what's actually kind of interesting is you don't actually have to play the corresponding unison. Like, you know, Whis normally goes with Beerus, Vados goes with Champa. You don't have to play the corresponding unison. And when I kind of thought about that, I said, okay, basically the only difference between these cards is the auto you get for basically playing it with 3 or more markers. So I thought to myself, do I want to play Whis and make my opponent pitch a card, or do I want to play Vados and make my opponent lose a battle card? There's so much removal in this deck already that I figured I would just play Whis, and for the rare time I ever actually play it with Empower, which honestly isn't going to come up all that often, but for the rare times that I do that, I want to make them pitch a card, right? Because there's already so much removal in this deck. And Batamo is one of those examples of where Champa just has really superior battle card value over Beerus, because this is a 1-drop searcher for your archetype, and a lot of times these types of cards don't really get played because you want to conserve deck space for better cards. But honestly, in green, there aren't that many better cards you play over it. But also, this can be played for free, which can find your unison, which can then put your field card in play. So that's really awesome. And then it also has the additional effect to get you into the next battle card of your chain if you need to do that. So overall, we're playing 12 ways to get to a turn 1 field card. With a 50 card main deck, our odds of seeing one of these in turn 1 in our first 6 cards is about 80%. It's a little more than 80%, which is nice. We're not playing the announcer card because I didn't really want to bog the deck down too much. I wanted to make sure I could save space for other better cards. But with that, having a full 16 copies of the field card, that brought us up to about 90% on our turn 1, finding a way to get to the field. And the other main reason I don't play the announcer is because he's not really searchable in the deck, so you'd have to hard draw him, as where Whis, you can search him off Batamo and then activate your Nameless Planet from the deck, and you get your unison established, which is great because, you know, in modern formats, especially in like mono green decks, it's very important to have your unison established. So that's kind of my rationale. The announcer is not like a terrible card, but again, that lack of searchability is not all that amazing. But anyways, moving on here. We have our 2-drops for the deck, so Batamo can send us into a 2-drop, but if we have no battle cards in play, our leader can also free play a 2-drop. So for example, if we have a Unison in our opening hand and maybe not a Batamo, that's okay because we can just free play a 2-drop and kind of go from there. But we're playing 4 copies of Magetta, which is just the best generic one. I kind of noticed that Frost and Kaba are better in respective situations. We'll talk about that in a second. But yeah, Magetta, really good. When you play it, you just draw a card, has the ability to get you into your 3-drops when it's KO'd, which all these effects that require them to be KO'd are facilitated by the field, which again is why this build revolves heavily around the field card. But yeah, Magetta able to attack battle cards in active mode without barrier as well, so you can clear some small battle cards at 15k or less. Frost has a pretty interesting effect. He can also attack battle cards in active mode without barrier, although he only goes up to 10k power. His other effect is if your opponent has no battle cards in play, your leader can't be attacked by your opponent's leader, essentially forcing them to attack into this guy, which again can proc his effect to go into a 3-drop. But the more I think about this, the more this should probably be the 2-drop Kaba, because that can help you take life, get self-awakened, although we won't really have too much of a problem in this build with that. We'll see in a little bit later. But that is a really good effect, and that guy also draws on swing, as where Frost is only really decent if your opponent's trying to attack your leader. But at the same time, we're already a 20k leader, so once we're awakened, we don't really care if our opponent's leader attacks us unless they have, I don't know, some sort of way to buff it for free, which isn't too prevalent. But yeah, just some thoughts. Like again, Frost and Kaba, they both have their allures, I guess. But yeah, right now we're playing 2 copies of Frost, and 6 2-drops has been fine so far. I don't mind that number. And then we're playing 4 copies of SS Kaba Wrathful Evolution. So this is our main guy that triggers our field card effect that says when a battle card attacks and KOs, blah, blah, blah. This is our main guy that triggers that without actually having to attack into a battle card, because when he swings, you just KO a battle card. So that's really good there. He's got critical, so you can swing face without having to worry about your opponent's board, because again, you're KOing your opponent's board on swing. And when he's KO'd, you get to play a 4-drop Universe 6, of which we play 2. We have 3 copies of each hit. Main reason I'm playing 3 is because you can't really get him out till a little bit later in the game, and in the case of Hit to Battle U7, while he has a very easy condition to play himself, he has essentially unique. You can't play another copy of him with his own effect if you have another one in play, so that's why we're playing 3 of each. But yeah, they both have their own conditional ways to get into play, so you don't necessarily have to rely on Kaba getting KO'd to do that, which I actually really like, because if your chain ever gets interrupted, especially by like non-KO removal, which blue and black have, you can run into a problem there. But these cards basically allow you to get into the top end of your quote-unquote chain without actually relying on that chain, which is nice. Hit Assassin Strike is honestly a pretty crazy SR, very much restricts your opponent from attacking you unless they want to pitch 2 cards per turn, and he's got the barrier protection, which is excellent. And then Hit to Battle U7, just 2 energy, comes down, solid removal, has barrier, so he's got good protection, and he puts good pressure on with Double Strike, even draws a card when he's played. And that's what a lot of these cards do. A lot of these cards get you cards when they're played, which is always a great thing a deck has going for it, so I actually really like that. Moving along, we have 4 copies of the Paragus Super Combo. It's honestly just the best super combo you can play for green. You start at 5 life, so you have the ability to get your super combos online very early. 3 copies of Homicidal Clones. This card is kind of perfect for this deck because we start at 5 life. So this card is basically always going to be live, help us get down to lower life so we can awaken. And what's really nice too is that since we're an awaken at 2 leader, if our opponent ever wants to like triple strike us or somehow deny our awaken, we can prevent that with Homicidal Clones, which is really nice. We can pretty much prevent that with any negate, but getting ourselves down to that 2 life when our opponent's trying to triple strike us is a really big thing that you'd otherwise have to play like Shocking Deathball for, but you can't always rely on the sparking. Homicidal Clones is just the perfect thing for this deck. And again, when you are starting at a much lower life like we are, being able to stop 2 attacks for 1 card really just like means the world. It's so good. Next up, we have 3 copies of Dormant Potential Unleashed. Only real reason we're playing 3 copies is because the meta is not crazy aggressive. If that is to change in set 16, you can definitely go up to 4 copies. I'd probably advise siding a 4th copy and not just like leaving it out of your 65. But yeah, 3 seems fine for now, especially Homicidal Clones. These cards don't necessarily conflict, but they're also not like super synergistic either, because if you go first in the gate of the game with Dormant Potential Unleashed and then you follow up with Homicidal Clones, your opponent can't attack anymore, so you lose the blocker on that token, but luckily that token can still be comboed with later on, so you don't completely lose the value out of it, so that is definitely a really nice thing. Then we have 4 copies of Frieza Charismatic Villain, followed by 2 copies of Fuse Zamasu Deity's Wrath. These cards are just a perfect pair, and what I really want to do in this deck is keep the threats as cheap as physically possible. Frieza Charismatic Villain obviously comes down for free when you have a Unison in play. Popping anything 7 or less, that's great, and that just adds more to the fact that you're doing such a great job of keeping your opponent's board clear that you don't really need additional board clear. And then, yeah, the 2 copies of Fuse Zamasu just to turn that Frieza into a hand-ripping threat, a threat your opponent can't really remove from the board. So between this guy and the 2 hits that you're looking to essentially spam, you have a lot of threats that your opponent cannot readily remove, which is a really nice thing that deck has going for it once again. Next up, we have 1 copy of Vegeta Resolute Agent of Destruction. Again, while I mentioned that there is so much removal in this deck, I wanted to have a mass barrier board wipe. I thought that was just really important to have, especially with like the Slug Engine running around at the moment, and then maybe your opponent playing cards like Hit, Assassin Strike, or just other barrier threats. I thought a 1 of mass barrier removal would be really, really nice. And obviously, Whis is not really a very powerful Unison, so being able to replace it at a key point in the game with a much better Unison seemed pretty good to me. We're also playing 2 copies of Demigrog Unison of Sorcery. This seemed like a really good card to include in the deck because Batamo can search it, and this thing is also pretty much guaranteed to keep its markers. So if you wanted to play Whis later on with Empower and find a field card, you'd be able to at least transfer those markers if the situation applied, but realistically, you're going to save those markers up for the -3, get another piece of removal on a barrier battle card with a cost 3 or less. And yeah, the main reason I included it is mostly because of its being searchable by Batamo. Now for the SCR of the deck, I am currently messing around with Cell Xeno. I'm not convinced it's the best SCR for the deck or anything, but the reason I'm trying it out is because I think you can realistically make it to 5 energy in this deck by the time you get hit down with Dormant Potential, with Homicidal Clones. You're pretty fairly defensive in this deck, albeit very cheaply as well, which is kind of nice. So I think making it turn 5 is pretty realistic, and you have pretty good math for Cell Xeno. Like, you have 3s, 4s, and 5s you can get out pretty easily, making 12, and I do think the deck lacks a little bit of game-ending power. Again, you can put out some pretty serious threats, but I think like having a real top-end boss monster is really, really nice. But other ones I've thought about, of course, you have the option to play Pan or Supreme Kai of Time, Space Time Unraveler. I also think the Bardock Primal Carnage SCR is probably also a pretty good one because, again, just being able to kill anything during battle is a really good thing to have. But yeah, right now I want my SCR to be a top-end boss monster. That, of course, you know, could change, and really whatever SCR you have is probably the best one to play, honestly. But Cell Xeno getting a reprint recently and being a lot cheaper is definitely really nice. And lastly, guys, wrapping up the deck, we have 1 copy of Further Instruction Champa. How could you play Champa without including Champa in your main deck? And then we have 1 copy of SS4 Bardock fighting against Fates. This overrealm has definitely been phased out as like the go-to overrealm for the meta. But since we have so much removal, I figured Secret Identity wasn't too important, and we can go with the 1 of fighting against Fate again to help close out games. So I don't know, guys. I've been having fun with this deck. Again, I don't expect it to be anywhere near meta, but I think it's a fun rogue green deck. Does some cool things. It's pretty annoying, honestly, when your opponent's able to interrupt you again with that non-KO removal. But still, it's a fun deck. I urge you to try it out. Let me know what you think in the comments below, guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.